Hi, ladies and gentlemen. We're contacting you because I think we have found something radically new at the what I call the dead letter office or the dead letter scrolls in the website earlychristianwritings.com. And it adds an entire half of a verse of Matthew 19 verses 16 to 17, in particular verse 17, that materially changes things and materially impacts the entire doctrine of the Trinity. It completely refutes it, because in this verse Jesus says the Father is the only true God, just like he does in John 17 1 to 3, but nobody wants to believe that because there's no other verse. Well, the other verse is right here in 19 verse 17 of Matthew. It's gonna blow your mind. It's the dead letter scroll episode. Well, of course, a little levity now and then can't hurt anybody, but this is actually a monumental truth, from the dead letter scrolls, as I put it. I don't know if you've ever seen that show, Signed, Sealed, and Delivered, but they used to have a dead letter office where they would try to connect up dead letters to where they belong. Well, we can do the same thing with the dead letters that are sitting in early Christian writings, .com, and they're supposed to be connected to verses, and he's done all this work, but no one said, "Hey, you know what? Are any of these sitting here materially would affect the verse if it could be restored?" And basically, anything that affects the Trinity that shows up in the earliest part of the church is stuff that has to be looked at, because this is stuff that was overlooked in the effort to destroy everything that possibly could be that would defeat the Trinity position. And that's really what went on later. So these passages, we'll see in Matthew 19, verse 17 in particular, that there's a recovery now of a very significant passage. It's like a Dead Sea Scroll, but using electronics. So let's take a look. So this is what it was, and we did this earlier today in a separate video on Matthew 19, verse 17. But this one is, I want to focus on just the absolute impact of this. So we've got 4 quotes from the original version of the passage, and it's really it has the other parts of the passage of 19, 16, 17, but I just wanted this part because this was brand new, and put these all in a row so we could look at them and then make a synthesis. And so, but what we see here is, after Jesus is saying, "Don't call me good," and all this other stuff, he's saying, "None is good but my Father who is in heaven." Well, that's a mighty big difference from what the NIV now has, is none is good but one. Like, that doesn't say anything about the Father. The fact the Father is in here in 2 quotes from Clement, 1 quote from Origen, and then the 4th quote from Justin Martyr is God only who made all things, which is a synonymous way of saying the Father, and may have been actually a interpretation put into the text, because when you're talking to pagans, they might not know who you mean by the Father. They could think you mean Zeus or Jupiter or something like that. So to me, they're all simply the Father. Okay. And then I did a synthesis. So it says none is good but the one God. And that's the other thing, is it's very clear here, particularly from the Organ quote, none is good but one, God the Father. So that's emphasizing the oneness of God. There's none good but one, God the Father. And there's no commas and stuff in Greek, just so you know. So this was Organ writes in Greek. So you could really just take out that comma. There's no good but one God the Father. So that's, to me, and you see that also in the Greek of the New Testament. I'll go into that later. So none is good but the one God, my Father only, who is in heaven and who made all things. So we can take the who made all things, um, and combine that with who is in heaven. But the most material thing is the my Father. Though that is a blockbuster fact that is ha- uh, it has incredible significance. Now let's look at the original verses. And the other thing is, when you want to put this all together, and I'm going to give you a reconstruction of the passage, we're going the full context. You've got it starts with a person kneeling to Jesus in Mark, but that part isn't repeated in Luke or in Matthew. But that tells you can use the Gospels, the synoptics, to recover things that are missing from the other two. And this is a perfect example. That's just an incidental detail that could be easily dropped, but it's not that it wasn't there. It was there. Mark saw it, and Mark wrote it down, but the other two didn't do so. That doesn't mean it isn't true. It means it is true. It's just the other two didn't think it was as important to mention as did Mark. But that doesn't mean it wasn't true, and that was why we need to consider it. But it's not material exactly, but it's useful. And then you have the rest of it's identical, okay? And now when you add in the new changes. Oh, and one more thing is what we also have to look at is the King James Bible uses additions. So let me just see if I can find something here for you. Yeah. So whenever you see italics, and let me see if I can pull up here. See this? So in each one of this, where it says none is good but one, that is God. Well, the highlighted in yellow don't exist. That means these are words that aren't really there. And in the Authorized King James, in the preface, they explain that anytime we italicize it, the words are not actually there. These are suggestions. You don't have to follow them. We thought it would read better if we put them in there. And they're not intended to change any meaning. Okay, so that's their own explanation. Now here it does change the meaning, because watch the difference. If I say to you, there is none good but one, that is God. Do you hear the same thing when I say none is good but the one God? No. You hear something significantly different when I say there none is good but the one God, because the second one is emphasizing the oneness of God, okay? Now what ends up happening is the sentence stops. And what we're recovering, this whole thing here, is what follows. This whole thing, these 4 quotes, are the words that followed after that. And what's missing is when it says, none is good but the one God, then what's missing is this part in yellow, my Father only, or alone. Either word, the words are synonymous. Only is better. I'll just go with that. Only, who is in heaven and who made all things. So none is good but the one God, my Father only, who is in heaven and who made all things. That's what's missing. That is a blockbuster. That is a dead letter scroll major discovery of the 21st century. And that tells us that we need to systematically go through the entire New Testament, and any passage that deals with the Trinity, or potentially is dealing with the nature of God or whatever. We need to do this exercise on every single verse. And I'm going to just tell you, it's a freak of nature that I even thought of doing this. And I just want to show you how God works. This verse here, this 4th verse, is not in the early Christian writings. I was just reading Justin Martin on a totally unrelated thing, and I noticed these words, and I said to myself, well, that sounds a lot like Matthew and Mark and Luke on the young person who comes up and kneels to Jesus and so on and so forth. So I just made a handwritten note to just, take a look at early Christian writings on this. So I go there, and I think because I had seen it, and I wrote down First Apology, chapter 16. And then I go and I look, and it's not in early Christian writings. That's interesting. So now I have to look it up. But while I'm there, I look and I see these quotes, and I go, my goodness me, I don't remember the word Father. Ooh, that when was that talked about? And it's all the other 3 quotes. So this immediately caught my attention, as you can imagine, because this changes everything. Now listen to the passage with these changes in it. So this is how it should read, and this is exactly I wrote this so this could be put in every single Bible, because this is how it must be restored without a question. And I'm talking about Bibles that are already the King James, everything. They should all put it in, because this passage has a material impact on our potentially being all idolaters. All the Trinitarians are all idolaters if we have this passage restored. Listen to it carefully. Just then a man came running up to him and kneeled before Jesus. Now that's borrowed from Mark 10:17. As I said, it's appropriate to restore things from the actual guys who are looking at the same documents and making copies from them. And asked, "Good teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life? Why do you call me good?" Okay, and then I have notes. These asterisks are notes on what's going on in the background. Jesus replied, So why do you call me good? That's a rhetorical question, meaning don't call me good. Jesus replied, none is good but the one God, my Father only, who is in heaven and who made all things. And there's three sources. So the footnote would say, look at Clement of Alexandria, look at Origen, and look at Justin Martyr. So anybody looking at the asterisk would know how to handle the situation. So the double asterisk here is under for good and call me. And these deletions by the NIV, they replaced it with post-Trinitarian textual variants, particularly ask me about what is good. So why do you ask me about what is good is how it reads now. And that's from the Codex Sinaiticus, 350 AD. That's what? Post-Nicaea. And it's probably post Council of Constantinople of 381 when the Trinity was developed. So you had bideity in 325. You had the Trinity in 381, probably after both of those. I think definitely after 381, because there's just something about this Sinaiticus that looks very much older than we're told. I mean, we're told it's around 350, but there's something that doesn't make sense to me. Just looking at it, it looks too formalized, to 400s type document. And then the Vaticanus, everybody says from 450. So it's clearly way after the Trinity has been developed and in operation and a law. So you have these deletions of words that change the text from not being about Jesus saying, don't call me good. It's just saying, why do you ask about the good? See, that's the change. So these footnotes fix it so people can say, okay, I want to see. I remember there was a different way this was worded, and you can be told what it is. And they're reminded these are post-Trinitarian sources, so they're not as reliable because there is potential corruption. Okay. Now the truth is, we know it's corruption because why are we even having a fight over this issue? And why, most importantly, why was that last clause cut off? So none is good, but one is all they left. Okay, they got rid of my Father only, who is in heaven and who made all things. So this was a deliberate destruction of the verse and the most material part, the word Father, because in a Trinitarian world, one God, my Father, means the Father is the one God. And that's exactly what Jesus says in John 17, 1-3. He prays to God, Father, you're the only true God. It means the same thing as saying God is one. Excuse me, that the Father is the one God. Same thing. But for some reason, Trinitarians think they have wiggle room about what that might mean. But when you have this, you have no more wiggle room because Jesus is saying none is good but the one God. So he's pointing at there's only one God. And he makes it clear who that is. It's the Father. That excludes anything about a son, because if Father is the one God and he's the only one who's good, and the Son is actually speaking and he's excluding himself from being called good, then there's no ambiguity that Jesus excludes himself from being worshiped as good and as God. Only the Father can be worshiped as good and God, and there's only one God, and that's what it says, the only one God, the Father. He alone can be worshiped as good, and he lives in heaven, and he was the one who created all things. So there's no equivocation of who is the Father, who is the one God, who is worthy of worship, and it excludes Jesus. When you have the whole passage, you have put dynamite under the orthodoxy that developed in 325 and 381, and it's demolished by just this one sequence of these 4 documents. Completely devastated. Imagine, and that's why I started with the scrolls. Imagine there were scrolls that were found at the caves of Qumran that said, hey, we have found Matthew 19, verses 16-19, and here it is. Because that's what we found. We have found the missing link, if you will. We have found the original document, the version it existed in the beginning. And imagine it was in the caves of Qumran. This would be the biggest discovery. It would, particularly because what's on the page would be destructive of one of the key core tenets that came from a pagan emperor forcing us all to a conference in Nicaea. Anyone who didn't go along was going to be exiled outside to the barbarian lands, which is a death sentence. 5 people were exiled. So we're clear. Nicaea was not a voluntary decision. It was a compulsory decision with a virtual death penalty, being exiled outside the empire. 5 people chose death basically over consenting to it. That's how serious they took it. And Constantine proved he was a pagan 3 years later by having a worship statue put up of himself as the face of Apollo, and he resurrected the Delphic oracle and put her and her serpent oracle chair or seat inside of Constantinople. Nobody who was a Christian bishop didn't know. It's just they all shut their mouths, and history doesn't even record it, except they're physical objects. The temple of Apollo with Constantine as the face existed until I think it was 1109, a wind had to blow it down, a storm had to blow it down. And Delphic oracle had long fallen into disuse by then. But the point is, this is a bomb. This is a bomb to the Trinity doctrine. You cannot now say or dispute any longer that Jesus is saying in this passage, I am not God. The Father is the only true God, like he says in John 17, 1-3. But now he's making it clear, you cannot worship me as God, because there's only one you cannot worship me as good and say, you're good like God is good. Somebody got on their knees, ran down to him, and was worshiping him. And he knew he was worshiping him. It wasn't just to do homage or respect. And he called the guy out and he said, you cannot call me good that way, because you're worshiping me as God, but there's only one who's good, and there's none good but the one God, my Father only, who is in heaven and who made all things. So I'm using the actual words of Jesus there. So it's undisputable anymore. You can't get away. There's no wiggle room left now. It's all gone. And you can see the fraud and the corruption that has led to where we are today, that a major doctrine of the Christian church was based and predicated on destroying parts of the Bible and burying them. And just by the grace of God, Clement of Alexandria, which is a major voice, by the way, not a minor voice, and who was the other persons? Let's just make sure we have it. And Oregon, major voice of orthodoxy. So was Justice Martin. So all 3 of these guys, none of them are wackadoodles. I mean, these are leading voices of early Christianity. There's nothing unorthodox, as far as I know, about any one of them. But you just have to know that Oregon, just so we're clear here, he was completely corrupted. And I'm going to do another video. He was completely corrupted by Rufinus after the fact. And he was an actually anti-Trinitarian, pro-subordination principle. He had pro-subordination principles, and Rufinus destroyed his manuscripts after he translated them. But unfortunately for Rufinus, some of those Greek transcripts have been found and then embarrassed him terribly. So I'm going to do another video on him very soon, so we don't get a wrong idea. Origen was not Trinitarian. But he was made to look that way by a guy editing him in 390, like around 400 AD, a guy who's back in the 250s and making him look Trinitarian. Okay, I hope that settles the point. That's all I had to say about this, that it is a major, major discovery. And it's like a Dead Sea Scroll, but it's the dead letter scrolls. And so I'm going to encourage us to, all of those who are on the channel and get heard about this. When you see a verse that you think is questionable, that it might have something to do with the Trinity doctrine, and you're a Trinitarian, you want to know the truth, right? Go look up earlychristianwritings.com and see what you see. All right, I'm going to come right. All right, thank you for watching, and I pray this will be a blessing to you and your family, and long term will give you a better focus on Yahweh and your prayer time, your prayer life, and this is going to have a lot of impact. Please share this with people you think would be interested in the video. Even share with people who you think would disagree with the video, and you want to get their input on what are any of the problems or issues with this, and then they can email me or put comments on this page, and I'll be glad to address anything that's seriously made. And anyway, God bless. Take care, everyone. Good night. Ciao. Bye.